Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission is always to take a complex stack of sources and give you the distilled insight, the shortcut to being truly well-informed.
And today we are wrestling with a story that is foundational and endlessly debated.
We're talking about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, specifically focusing on the deeply flawed, deeply complicated man at the center of it all, Lot.
It's an intense and honestly sometimes disturbing narrative from Genesis, and our goal today is to really analyze the multiple lessons that come out of these ancient texts.
Right, because it's so much more than a simple morality tale.
Exactly. We're looking at the slippery slope of compromise, the surprising and multifaceted nature of divine judgment, and the ultimate dark redemption involving Lot and his daughters.
Yeah, we have sources that shine a really harsh light on Lot's character, the devastating fate of his wife, and that critical paradox of how the Bible even defines righteousness.
So let's unpack this. When
Yeah.
we look at Lot's life, there is one huge theme that just defines his entire story.
And that's the progression of compromise.
It is. Lot begins in, the best possible circumstances. He's Abraham's nephew, traveling under the protection and influence of a man literally called by God.
And he gets rich just by being associated with him. Genesis 13 says Lot had become immensely wealthy.
Rich in his own right, with flocks and herds. And that prosperity, well, it leads to conflict. Their herdsmen are fighting.
So they have to separate. And Abraham, in a moment of real generosity, gives Lot the first choice of the land.
And Lot looks out, sees that well-watered, incredibly fertile Jordan Valley. It looks like paradise. And that choice, that's where the subtle moral drift begins.
It's such a classic example of choosing earthly comfort over, I guess, spiritual wisdom.
It is. The texts detail this slow, destructive slide. It's almost like watching a car drift off the road in slow motion. First, he was just looking toward the wealth of Sodom.
Okay.
Then he gives in a little more, pitching his tent toward the city. And soon enough, that proximity becomes full immersion. He's living right inside the corruption.
He went all in. He chose the material gain over keeping his distance from a place he knew was wicked.
And by the time we get to Genesis 19, that compromise is complete. He's totally entrenched. He's not just a resident.
No, we find him sitting in the city gate.
Right, which our sources confirm was the traditional seat of judgment in business. He's a city official, an influential man.
And critically, the sin of that culture had seeped into his own family. His daughters were engaged to local men.
Completely rooted in the lifestyle of Sodom, his whole family structure was now built on this incredibly wicked place.
Which brings us to the shocking failure that really sets up the city's destruction. Two angels arrive, appearing as men.
And Lot, he rushes to insist they take shelter in his home. He knows exactly what kind of danger travelers faced on those streets.
He knows the city's reputation.
He does, and that insistence on hospitality, that was a high virtue in the ancient world. It could literally save a life.
Yeah.
But the mob scene that follows just reveals everything.
The men of the city, it says young and old, all the people from every quarter, they surround the house.
And they demand the guests that we may know them carnally.
And we need to be clear, this wasn't an invitation. This was a violent collective demand for sexual domination, for abuse.
The humiliation of foreigners who were supposed to be under his protection.
And this is where we see Lot's personal moral corruption just fully exposed. In this moment of panic, he tries to uphold his duty to his guests.
And he does the horrifying, unthinkable thing. He offers the mob his 2 virgin daughters instead.
Just a chilling moment. I mean, for a modern listener, it's almost impossible to process. How could hospitality be more important than your own children?
It just reveals the drastically low place of women in that time and culture. In Lot's compromised mind, he was trying to negotiate with pure evil.
By offering them something even more evil.
Exactly. He thought he had to save his guests at any cost, and tragically, his daughters were, to him, expendable assets in that calculation. He tried to solve a crisis of sin through a greater sin. It's utterly indefensible.
But the mob never gets the chance to act on that horrifying offer.
No, you see immediate, dramatic, divine intervention. The angels strike the men outside with blindness. They can't even find the door.
So they were literally saved from Lot's own terrible decision.
Yes, and that's a huge point. God's protection often shows up despite our moral failings, not because of our wisdom.
Okay, so even after that, after being explicitly warned of imminent destruction, Lot still struggles. He goes to warn his future sons-in-law.
And they laugh at him. They think he's joking.
Why? Why would they think he's joking?
Because of his long-term moral drift. Lot's compromise had completely ruined his testimony. The very men he was trying to save just dismissed his warning because, to them, he was one of them. He was indistinguishable from the world they lived in.
He had no credibility left.
None. So even with fire and brimstone on the horizon, the text says Lot lingered. He just couldn't bring himself to leave.
He couldn't let go of the city that held his wealth, his status, his whole life.
And this resistance is so critical. Because of his indecision, the angels had to physically seize him, his wife, and his daughters by the hand and literally drag them out of the city.
It was a forced evacuation.
It was. And the sources really emphasize this. God's mercy sometimes has to override our human resistance, even if it feels forceful. It's for our survival.
And even then, Lot's lingering heart compromises the escape plan. The angels tell them, flee to the mountains.
But he objects. He pleads to go to a small nearby city called Zoar, the little one. He's afraid the disaster will overtake him in the mountains.
And the angel makes this incredible allowance, delaying the entire judgment of a city until Lot is safely there.
Which brings us to the famous tragedy of Lot's wife. We all know the story. She looks back and she's turned into a pillar of salt.
Right, and her disobedience, it's seen as this monument to her hidden loyalty to Sodom, her longing for what she's leaving behind.
And here's where the sources get really insightful. This act is often linked to the spiritual vice of sloth.
Wait, sloth. As in laziness.
No, and that's the key. When we talk about sloth in this context, we aren't talking about physical laziness or, slowness of feet. We are talking about the soul's deep-seated unwillingness to embrace the new life God is calling them to.
Ah, so her feet were running, but her heart was standing still.
Perfectly put. It's the soul's heavy anchor, refusing to move even when the body is being pulled forward. She wasn't judged for curiosity. She was judged for longing.
Her fate is this powerful picture of spiritual paralysis, clinging to the old ways even when God is actively delivering you from them.
Exactly. She had been physically rescued, but spiritually she was still a resident of Sodom.
That terrifying event, the attempted violence at Lot's home, is so often seen as the only reason for the city's destruction. But the wider sources, they tell a much fuller story. What were they really destroyed for?
Right. Well, Genesis 19 focuses on that attempted sexual violence and inhospitality. When God addresses Sodom's sins later through the prophets, the condemnation is so much broader.
Ezekiel 16 is key here, isn't it?
It's crucial. It paints a picture of systemic civic failure.
So the biggest problems weren't solely the sexual depravity that the story always focuses on.
The sexual depravity was definitely part of the culture, but the primary sins listed emphasize social and economic injustice. Ezekiel explicitly lists 4 main failures. Number 1, pride, arrogance, and haughtiness.
Okay.
2, gluttony and prosperous ease, basically, living in comfort and idleness. And 3, and this one is huge, the catastrophic neglect of the poor and needy, a failure in compassion and justice.
Wow. That completely shifts the focus of the judgment. I mean, Genesis 18 even refers to the outcry against Sodom, which is a reference to victim suffering, to exploitation within the city.
Exactly. The city wasn't destroyed because people were having too much fun. It was destroyed because they were cruel, unjust, and arrogant. The culture was saturated in this profound wickedness.
Now, we can't entirely ignore the specific incident in Genesis 19. The interpretation is often very narrow, but there's a real debate here.
There is. Some sources absolutely view the demand to know them carnally as a condemnation of same-sex behavior.
But others argue the central sin was violent inhospitality and the abuse of power, regardless of the gender of the victims.
The debate really hinges on whether the mob's motive was sexual attraction or pure dominance, the humiliation of the foreigner. And important to note, many Old Testament references to Sodom don't even mention sexual sin at all.
And then there's the New Testament complexity. Jude 7 talks about the cities pursuing unnatural or strange flesh.
Yeah, sarkos heteros in the Greek. And the debate there is fascinating. Some scholars interpret that literally as other flesh. Not just same-sex behavior among humans, but maybe a lust for angels specifically.
Connecting back to that idea of humans trying to mate with angelic beings in Genesis 6.
It's a possible reading. So the key takeaway, regardless of where you land on that specific debate, is that the city was destroyed for a culture of comprehensive corruption. Pride, affluence, and injustice were just as offensive to God as the violence and sexual immorality.
The judgment was total because the corruption was total. Okay, so moving to the final act of this tragedy. Lot and his daughters leave Zoar, that little compromised city.
They leave out of fear and flee to a desolate cave in the mountains. They are completely isolated, psychologically shattered.
And the sources indicate they believed the entire world had been wiped out. not just Sodom and Gomorrah.
In their fear and desperation, they conclude they're the last hope. They believe they need to procreate to continue the human race.
So they come up with this plan that is just rooted in the moral laxity they learned in Sodom.
They make Lot drunk with wine on 2 consecutive nights and sleep with him to get pregnant. It's incest.
And this is the consequence of Lot's entire life of compromise, just coming to a head.
And the fallout is immediate and lasting. The daughters give birth to Moab and Ben-Ammi. They become the fathers of the Moabites and Ammonites.
2 nations that would become centuries-long enemies and major obstacles to Israel.
So Lot's personal, seemingly small compromises ultimately led to massive political and military problems for Israel generations down the line. It's a huge ripple effect.
It connects his first act of compromise, just looking toward Sodom, to this ultimate failure that creates enemies for his descendants.
Yeah.
This whole story is just a masterclass in failure. Compromise, offering his daughters to rape, lingering, incest, which forces us to ask the critical question, how could this man, Lot, possibly be called a righteous man in 2 Peter?
This is the critical paradox that the sources help us resolve. And the answer is that the Bible calls many deeply imperfect people righteous.
Okay.
Lot was called righteous not because of his moral perfection, obviously not, but because, as Peter writes, his righteous soul was tormented day after day by their lawless deeds in Sodom.
Hold on, so his righteousness wasn't based on his behavior, which was horrifying, but on an internal conviction against the evil around him.
Precisely. Lot's righteousness was a declaration, a status. It was based on God's grace alone, received through faith, despite his terrible actions.
It's what's called forensic righteousness.
It is. He was genuinely tormented by the evil, even if he didn't have the strength to fully separate himself from it.
So his life is the ultimate example of being saved as through fire. He lost everything, his wealth, his prestige, his family, really. His life accomplished almost nothing of lasting earthly value.
All due to his compromises. Yet his soul was spared by God's sheer mercy.
But the story of God's sovereignty, it runs even deeper than that human failure. Let's talk about the incredible ultimate redemption that flows from this really dark lineage.
Even from the shame of that incestuous act, God brought forth an incredible good.
The Moabitess people, descendants of Moab.
Well,
They would eventually give us the story of Ruth.
that's right. And Ruth, a Moabitess, marries Boaz and becomes the great-grandmother of King David.
Through whom Jesus the Messiah would ultimately come.
It's a powerful, almost unimaginable connection. It speaks to that theme of Romans 8.28. God caused even this worst-case scenario incest born from a lifetime of compromise to work together for good.
He redeemed the lineage despite the catastrophic failures of Lot and his daughters. It shows God's ultimate commitment to rescue those he chooses.
Even if he has to literally drag them out of the city gates. It assures us that while our actions absolutely have consequences, God's plan is not derailable by our weakness.
This deep dive really does serve as instruction for us. The takeaways are so clear. Be vigilant about the danger of compromise, that slow drift. Recognize that judgment addresses systemic corruption, pride, injustice, just as much as overt sin. And heed the warning of Lot's wife and the high cost of a lingering heart, that spiritual sloth.
And for a final thought for you to explore, remember that Lot demanded his own way. He pleaded to escape to Zoar, the little one, that little bit of compromise he felt he could handle.
And God granted his request.
He did. The terrifying truth is that while God is merciful, he sometimes permits us to follow our own little bit of sin or self-will. But the source material is very clear. There are always awful consequences for doing so.
So ask yourself today, what little sin or compromise are you lingering in, demanding that God make an exception for your comfort, despite the warning of Lot's wasted life? We'll leave you with that challenge. Thanks for diving deep with us.